Welcome in, everybody. Today we're taking a deep dive into the heart of New York City.
Sounds pretty intense.
Yeah, it is. We're tackling homelessness,
Yeah.
and we're going way beyond just like the surface level stuff, you
Why
know?
getting to the nitty gritty?
Exactly. We
Yeah.
want to understand how it really impacts people's lives.
I think that's so important because it's easy to get caught up in the numbers and forget that there are real people behind the statistics.
Yeah, for sure. And that's what we're going to do today. We're diving into this article from Investor called Homelessness in New York, The Struggle for Stability.
Okay, I've heard of Investor.
Yeah, they do some really interesting reporting. And in this article, we're going to meet a family, John, Zoe, and their little girl, Isabella. They're living this reality every single day, dealing with sky-high rents, the fallout from the pandemic.
It's a lot for anyone to handle.
Absolutely.
Wow.
But it's not all doom and gloom. There are these stories of resilience that are really powerful and inspiring.
One thing that really jumped out at me right away from the article was this statistic that New York City is seeing the highest levels of homelessness in almost a century.
Wow.
Almost 1 million people are living in shelters right now.
It's hard to wrap your head around a number like that, isn't it?
It is. It's like a whole city within a city struggling to find a place to call home.
Yeah, we see people on the streets, but 1 million people, that's just mind-boggling.
It really puts things into perspective. And, historically speaking, this is truly unprecedented. The article mentioned that the number of homeless adults has doubled in just the last decade.
So what's driving this massive increase?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Literally, yeah.
Well, maybe meeting John and his family can give us some clues. Their story is really at the heart of the article. They're currently living in a shelter in Brooklyn.
John's had a tough life, kicked out of his home at 21, been in and out of shelters ever since.
Sadly, that's not an uncommon story.
No, it's not. And it just highlights how precarious things can be for so many people. Like one bad break, and anyone could find themselves in that same situation.
That's what's so scary about it. It could happen to anyone.
Exactly. But John, he's working hard. He's got the night shift at a hospital trying to provide for Zoe and Isabella. And Zoe has been his rock, just this incredible support system.
It's amazing how people can find strength in each other, even in the toughest of times.
Yeah, they're really making it work despite the odds.
It's inspiring, but it also makes you realize how hard it is to get back on your feet, even with a job and a loving family. Finding an affordable place to live in New York, it's almost impossible.
Speaking of which, the article describes their current shelter as actually being better than some others. It's got more space, it's safer, but still it's not home,
No, of course not.
Can you imagine being constantly surrounded by other families in the same situation, constantly reminded that you're not where you want to be?
It must be incredibly stressful, like this constant low-grade anxiety, never knowing what the future holds.
And it makes you think, even if you're working hard, are you really ever that far from the edge?
Right. It could be a medical emergency, a sudden job loss, anything could push you over.
It's a sobering thought for sure.
And it's important to remember that this isn't just about bad luck. There are systemic issues at play here. John's story is just one example of a citywide crisis that has deep roots.
So what's pushing so many New Yorkers toward homelessness? Is it all about the sky-high rents, or is there something more to it?
Well, the article points to a few different factors. Rising rents are definitely a huge part of the problem.
I mean, you hear stories about these crazy rent increases all the time.
Yeah, for real.
Yeah.
The article actually mentions apartments that used to rent for like $200 a month, now going for thousands.
That's insane.
I know, it's like monopoly money, but this is people's lives we're talking about.
No wonder people are getting priced out of the city. It must be impossible to keep up with that.
It is for many people, and it really ties into this bigger issue of income inequality. The gap between the haves and have-nots in New York is massive, and it's only getting worse.
So even if you're working, your wages might not be enough to keep up with the rising cost of living, let alone save up enough to buy a place of your own.
Exactly. And then on top of all that, you have the pandemic, which hit everyone pretty hard.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
The article cites this CUNY survey that found that almost half of New Yorkers were struggling to pay rent right when the pandemic started.
Wow.
And we're still seeing the ripple effects of that today.
Job losses, businesses closing. It was like this domino effect that impacted everyone.
And once you lose your footing, it can be incredibly difficult to get back up, especially when the system itself seems like it's working against you.
Okay, so we've got rising rents, income inequality, and the lasting effects of the pandemic all contributing to this crisis.
It's a perfect storm.
But there are people out there fighting to make a difference, right? Like Andel, the lawyer who heads up Avenues for Justice.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
He's amazing.
What's his take on all of this?
Well, Andel is really on the front lines of this issue. He works to help young people avoid the criminal justice system and find stability. And he sees firsthand how housing insecurity and homelessness are intertwined with so many other problems.
Yeah, can imagine.
And he's very outspoken about the impact of these drastic rent increases. You know, the ones we were talking about from $200 to $4,000. He calls that a major driver of homelessness.
It's like we've created a system that sets people up to fail. You can work as hard as you want, but if the cost of living keeps going up, what chance do you really have?
That's exactly the point he's making. And it raises this bigger question of individual responsibility versus systemic change.
Yeah.
You know, is it all on individuals to pull themselves up by their bootstraps, or is there responsibility to fix a system that seems fundamentally broken?
That's a tough question.
Hmm.
And it makes me wonder, what can organizations like Avenues for Justice actually do in the face of such overwhelming challenges? I mean, they can't just magically create affordable housing overnight, right?
Right? They can't just wave a magic wand and make all the problems disappear. But they are doing some really incredible work, especially considering how limited their resources are.
Yeah, that's what amazes me about these organizations. They're working miracles on a shoestring budget.
Yeah, exactly. They provide legal aid to help people understand their rights and navigate the system, which, let's be honest, can be incredibly confusing even if you're not experiencing homelessness.
Oh, totally. It's like adding insult to injury, right? You're already going through so much, and then you have to fight your way through all this bureaucracy just to get help.
It's a nightmare. And that's where Avenues for Justice steps in. They help people cut through the red tape and connect with housing assistance programs. They also offer things like mental health counseling and job training.
So they're really providing this holistic support system that addresses not just the immediate need for housing, but also the underlying issues that might have contributed to someone becoming homeless in the first place.
Yeah, exactly. It's about empowering people to get back on their feet and build a better future for themselves.
That makes sense. But you mentioned limited resources earlier. What are some of the biggest challenges organizations like this face?
Well, honestly, the demand for their services is just enormous.
Yeah.
We were talking about that statistic earlier. Nearly 1 million people experiencing homelessness in New York City.
It's a staggering number.
It is.
Yeah.
And that means there are a lot of people out there who need help. And while there are some incredibly dedicated individuals and organizations working tirelessly to address this issue, there's simply not enough funding or support to meet the overwhelming need.
It's like trying to empty the ocean with a teaspoon, isn't it? You're doing what you can, but it feels like you're barely making a dent in the problem.
Yeah, it's a good analogy.
Yeah.
And it highlights the fact that while these nonprofits are absolutely essential, they can't solve this crisis on their own.
So what's the solution then?
Well, we need systemic change. We need policies that address the root causes of homelessness, not just the symptoms.
Okay, so let's talk policy. What kind of solutions are out there? What needs to happen to really move the needle on this issue?
Well, one of the most important things is to increase the supply of affordable housing. You know, if there simply aren't enough places that people can afford to live, then people will end up on the streets.
Yeah, that's just basic supply and demand, right?
Exactly. And it seems obvious, but it's incredibly difficult to actually make happen. Building affordable housing takes time and money and political will.
So are there things that could be done more immediately while we're working on the long-term solution of building more affordable housing?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Expanding rental assistance programs is a big one. Providing vouchers or subsidies that help people afford rent can prevent them from falling into homelessness in the first place.
Right, so it's a preventative measure rather than waiting for people to hit rock bottom and then trying to help them pick up the pieces.
Exactly. And then there are a bunch of other policy solutions that can also contribute to greater stability and help people get back on their feet. Things like raising the minimum wage, investing in job training programs, expanding access to mental health care and addiction treatment.
So it's about addressing all of the factors that might contribute to someone becoming homeless, not just providing a roof over their heads.
Right. It's about recognizing that poverty, lack of affordable housing, mental health challenges, addiction, they're all interconnected.
It's like this tangled web of issues that all feed into each other.
Yeah, and it makes you realize that there's no easy fix. It's going to take a multifaceted approach to really untangle this mess.
But it sounds like there are solutions out there. At least that's encouraging.
There are, and there are people working every day to try to make those solutions a reality.
That's good to hear. But I have to admit, it's easy to feel overwhelmed by the sheer scale of this problem. Even with all these potential solutions, it still feels like we're talking about a monumental task.
It is a monumental task, but even small actions can make a difference. And hearing stories like John and Zoe's reminds us why this fight is so important.
Yeah, their story really stuck with me. Despite facing all these obstacles, they haven't given up hope. Or they're still fighting for a better future for themselves and their daughter. Yeah, it's like even when things are at their worst, you can still find that strength to keep going. And it makes you think, what can we do, even as individuals, to help families like theirs?
That's the big question, right? Because it's easy to feel powerless when you're faced with an issue this big.
Hmm.
But there are things we can all do.
Like what?
Well, volunteering at a local shelter or a nonprofit, like Avenues for Justice, even just a few hours a month can make a difference.
Sometimes you think like, ugh, what can I do? I'm just one person. But you know, if everyone thought that way, nothing would ever change.
Exactly. Those small contributions, when you multiply them by thousands of people, can have a huge impact.
So it's about showing up and doing what you can, even if it feels small.
Exactly. And if you're not in a position to donate your time, even a small financial contribution to an organization that's working on the front lines can go a long way.
Right? Every little bit helps. And we can't forget about the power of advocacy, contacting our elected officials, letting them know that this is an issue that we care about.
Yeah, for sure. We need to support policies that create affordable housing, expand rental assistance, provide those support services.
We have a voice and we need to use it.
It's about holding our leaders accountable and making sure that this issue stays on the agenda. Because at the end of the day, this isn't about statistics. It's about real people, real families who are struggling to survive in a system that often feels stacked against them.
It's like John said in the article, all he wants is a safe and secure place for his daughter to live where she can dream big dreams without having to worry about where she's going to sleep at night.
It's such a basic human need, but for so many people, it feels completely out of reach.
It's heartbreaking, but it's also a call to action. We can't just turn away from this. We have to keep talking about it, raising
Right.
awareness, pushing for solutions.
It's a complex problem, but it's not unsolvable.
I think that's a really important point to remember. It's easy to get overwhelmed, but we can't let the scale of the problem paralyze us into inaction.
Every step we take, no matter how small, can help to create a more just and compassionate city,
Yeah.
a city where everyone has a chance to thrive.
Yeah, a city where everyone has a place to call home.
That's the dream.
Well said.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's about all the time we have for today.
Wow, that went by fast.
It did. It's a heavy topic, but I'm glad we had this conversation.
Me too. I think it's so important to shed light on these issues and hopefully inspire people to get involved.
I hope so too. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into homelessness in New York City. We hope you learned something new and maybe even felt inspired to take action. Remember, even small steps can lead to big change. So let's keep the conversation going and let's keep working towards a better future for everyone.
Couldn't have said it better myself.